Hi, I'm Tom Stephenson and welcome to adding a change to a schedule using MS Project. This is tutorial 7 in a series of MS Project how-to videos, and we are going to be looking at how a change can impact a project. So in our example, we're going to be using a construction project and we're going to insert a change. Now we can look at changes a number of ways. We could look at a change as something that has actually happened and we are wanting to record it in the updating process. We discussed that in tutorial 5, how we update a schedule. We could also look at a change like it's contemplated and we're thinking about it and we want to see the impact that it's going to have on the schedule if we just do it under normal working hours and how that might impact the project. So we can be using it in a variety of ways, but no matter what, if you have changes on your project, you should be looking at how is this going to impact my project? Am I going to have to change the finish date? What do I communicate with the client? Is the client really time driven? And if they're time driven, then what does that in essence mean? Does that mean that we're going to have to make sure that once we put this change in, that we then figure out ways to compress the schedule or accelerate the schedule so that we still finish the project on time? One thing I can tell you for sure, if you're not adding changes to your project, then you really don't know where you are. And if you don't know where you are, then you're not going to be able to recover time and you're going to run into all kinds of problems with clients, owners, subcontractors, suppliers, etc. So it can become a very stressful situation. So let's get to it. So if we're going to add a change to a schedule, we need to know what the change is. And I'm going to, this is essentially an office project and it has a bunch of activities. And if I want to see what the change is, I have to make sure that it has been, the project has been set as a baseline. So I need to make sure that there's a baseline that's been set. So I just go to Project, Set Baseline, click OK. If you're doing an ongoing project, you may have already had updates. So you could just do this file and save it as a change order file or a contemplated change order that you're looking at. So maybe in this situation, we'll pretend it's like we're contemplating this change and we want to see what's going to happen. So once I've set the baseline, if I go to my variance screen, remember to click the check the square icon box and right click and go to variance, you should see that this is populated with dates, right? And you should see the variance columns. In this case, it'll say 0 because we haven't made any changes as of yet. So what I want to do is I want to see what this, I'm going to go back to my entry view. I'm going to see what this change order, how it impacts my schedule. And we call a change order that we insert into a schedule. The name given to it is a fragmented network. So it's a network of activities and we're going to insert it into the schedule and then we're going to connect it up with the existing activities and it's either going to push them or it's not going to push them. If it pushes them, then obviously it's going to come on the critical path at some point. The whole thing might be on the critical path or some of it might be on the critical path, and then that's going to show us the impact that the change has on the schedule. Now, if we're contemplating it as opposed to updating would have the connotation that it's already been completed, so it's history, so we're just updating that process and looking at the impact it's having. If we're contemplating it, we're inserting what our plan is for it, seeing how it impacts it, and then we may cost out according to the type of impact. So, for example, if this change order is impacting the schedule and we see it's impacting it by 5 days, let's say, then it's sort of like, well, how could we get that 5 days back or shorten the impact of this by 5 days? And that might involve weekends and overtime work, and that would change the cost of the change as well. So if you're contemplating it, then you could develop different scenarios and determine, all right, well, we're going to have to work weekends and do this, the X, Y, Z, and this is what it's going to cost, get the client to sign off on it, and then you can move forward with it. At least you're being very transparent and you're understanding the impacts of what's going on. All too often I see where changes are not inserted into the schedule and then I don't really know how contractors fully understand their costs if they haven't been checking it, right? And I don't know how that communication really comes across with clients if they really haven't been updating the schedule to show the impacts that those changes have. So this is a very proactive and positive way, and this is a best practice in project management, particularly project management using some sort of scheduling software so we can use it and leverage it to its full advantage. So I've got this change order, and it's actually, so we're doing an office renovation, and we're going to insert this change order, which is to put a bulkhead around an office. All right, so we could assume that this office is just going to have drywall going straight up, and then there's like a T-bar ceiling that's going across, like you typically see in offices with drop-down grid ceiling. And so the clients decide they want to have a bulkhead that goes around the outside edge of the office, and that's going to include some pot lights, and it's going to mean that we got to move some sprinklers and a few different things of that nature. So we would need to know, well, when are we finding this out? Where is it going to impact the project? So I'm going to say that it's going to, we're finding out, and this is going to be inserted between this tape drywall and installed T-bar ceiling. And so it probably means we're in this zone here of figuring out how this change is going to impact our project. So I would have listed out and figured out how many activities this bulkhead is going to take, much like you did with your overall project, like we talked about in tutorial 1 and tutorial 2. And I'm going to insert a bunch of rows here that represent the activity. So I happen to know, I think I've got it right, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it's 8 rows that I'm going to insert above install T-bar ceiling. So I highlight those rows down the side, and I right click on my mouse and I go insert task, kind of like you would in Excel where you'd insert rows. And now I'm going to proceed to type in the activity. So I'm going to create a heading, and I'm going to call it change impact. I'm just going to call it change impact bulkhead. All right, and I'm going to call it in conference room. And I'm just going to double click this to get it wide, and I'm going to double click this to bring it up. And now I'm just going to proceed to type the rest of the activities. Install metal bulkhead, and then I'm going to put in relocate rough in of diffusers, relocate sprinklers, install new pot lights, and I'm going to have inspections, and install the drywall on bulkhead, and tape drywall bulkhead. I'm trying to be specific, so I separate it out from the taping of the drywall of the walls, etc. And so I've got those 8 activities that I put in. I'm going to make a heading, and we know how to do that from our work breakdown discussion in earlier tutorials, I think in tutorial 1 and 2. And I'm going to just highlight everything below change impact, and I'm going to go up to the task tab, and I'm going to indent. And you know what? If this was like a real change order, I could number them. I could say CO1, and then I could say change impact bulkhead, and then I could have CO2. I could have, you know, if my project has 50 change orders in it, I could have them all listed under that. And then I could even create a heading that had just change orders and had all the change orders linked to the activities above. That would be one way of organizing it. But right now I want to see the impact of the change right around the activities that it's impacting. So I've inserted it right where it's going to be most visible for us to see the impact. So now I've got to give it durations, just like you have to give everything duration. So I'm going to put 5 days here, relocate rough-in diffusers 1 day, relocate sprinklers 3 days, install new pot lights 1 day, inspections I've given 2 days for, install drywall on bulkhead 1 day, and tape drywall 3 days. Okay, so I put those durations in, and I'm going to link these 7 activities because I don't like to link. Remember, best practice is not to link to headings. Program lets you do it, but I would advise against it. And link those activities together. And so right now, these activities are situated on the first day of the project. So wherever your first day of the project is, that's where they're going to be showing up. So until we actually say when they are occurring, the program just puts everything at the first day. So that means we have to actually connect it to what makes sense. And so in our particular example here, we're going to link it to tape drywall, which is over here, and that's activity number 11. So I'm just going to type activity number 11 there, and we know that we can quickly scroll to task if we want to move to that part of the screen where it's indicated. So I'm under the task tab. That'll bring that part up to the screen, and I can sort of see that this is just sitting out there, and right now it's just sitting there. It's not showing any impact to the project, because if I go check on the variance screen, it just shows everything is 0 days. It won't show anything under baseline because it wasn't there when we created the baseline. So that's why that says not applicable. So what we want to do is we want to know how is it impacting our project altogether. And so we have to make the connections that make sense. So let's say that with install metal bulkhead, we could do this 2 ways. We could, if we go here and we see the link, right now it's at a finish to start. So as soon as the tape drywall finishes, we start that. Let's assume that that's not the way that this would have played out. We could have said that we found out about this and we plan to do it 5 days before we finish the taping of the drywall. If that was the case, we could double click on this activity, and that brings up the task information box. We could go to predecessors and we could put in a -5 day lag. And if we click OK, watch what happens over here. This is going to pull this back 5 working days. All right, so that pulls it back 5 working days, and that's when we would have started that. So that's one way of doing it. Best practice typically is to try to avoid negative lags, and indeed in some projects your contracts may require that you put no negative lags on the project. Commercial work, it's usually not an issue, but usually heavy civil projects, industrial projects, infrastructure type projects, they may have that wording in the actual contract, so you could watch for that. If that's the case, the other way that we could do it is we could double click, and instead of having a -5 day lag, we could actually change this to a start to start relationship and say that 4 days, positive 4 days, after we start tape drywall, we're going to start to tape we're going to start to install the metal bulkhead. So tape drywall, 4 days after that starts, we're going to start to install the metal bulkhead, which would kind of make sense. Like, we're coming up to this and we're seeing, well, where we could insert this, and we're saying, well, we can't have this ready until 4 days after we start installing the taping of the drywall. So I'm going to click OK. You're really not going to see this move at all. Really basically just moved it to be a start to start relationship, and so it's starting 4 working days after the start of this activity here. Now you notice this is still showing as being critical, and this is showing as having float, and that's because we have an open end, the dreaded open end. We want to make sure that we connect this up so that we can see the impact this is having, because right now it's not going to show us there's any impact of this change. If I go back to the variance screen, it's still showing 0 days. So it's like, okay, that's why in earlier tutorials we said best practice, make sure that you don't have any open ends. So what we want to do is we want to connect this, and I'm just going to pull this to the side so you can see it. We want to connect it to install T-bar ceiling. So what we're saying is we can't install the T-bar ceiling, which, if you know construction, you need to put a corner edge round where the grid is going, and if we don't have the bulkhead there, we don't know where to position our T-bar because we want to space the tiles evenly. So we need that bulkhead in place first, and we need the drywall in place. So we're saying we're going to tape it, then we're going to start to install the T-bar ceiling. So I want to connect that T-bar ceiling to activity number 19. I'm going to keep number 11 there because it does make sense that the walls have been taped. So I'm going to say 11, comma, and I'm going to put 19. And when I press enter, you should see this click and then this move. So this is going to push this out. So when I press enter, see how it moved and it changed the critical path. So now if I take a look at this and I go over here, we can kind of see how this is playing out. And this is also showing as being critical too, because we've got a start-to-start relationship. If this doesn't start, that doesn't start 4 days later, and that will delay the project. Okay, so it's critical that that actually starts on time too. Otherwise, the way we put this connection in place, it would delay this. Okay, so we put that in. We've got those connections in place. And now what we could do is we could look at how is this impacting the project. And we know that this kind of when we do something and it impacts something else, like when we put number 19, it affected all these dates. So there's a clue, okay, this is really impacting our project here. So what I would probably want to do in this situation, I would want to look at it in the variant screen, but also in the tracking Gantt view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide to the left. Remember we talked about maneuvering different screens in one of the earlier tutorials, and please feel free to go to my YouTube channel and check out the various tutorials and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you'll get new updates. I'm going to slide down, right click to tracking Gantt, right click my mouse or the pad on your laptop if that's what you're using, and I'm going to go scroll to task. So I'm in the task tab. I'm going to click scroll to task so it brings it up on my screen. And now I can see what's going on over here. So I can see the baseline and I can see the impact that this is actually having on my schedule. So if I scroll along here, I can see this is new. It doesn't have any baseline because it was new to the project. And this was where the existing activities are. So what's my variance? Well, where do I see the variance? I go to the variance screen. So I'm going to click on the square icon box over here on the top left. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to variance. When I go to variance, I can see at the top here, I can see where the impact is. It's 12 days. It follows through the rest of my project. So essentially, this change which occurred is impacting my project by 12 days. Now, I could in this screen, and we've talked about this, how you could customize it, I could insert a duration column. So I'm going to just type D for duration. I right clicked and I typed D for duration in this screen. And that shows me all the durations. Maybe I'll just do that again because I think I maybe did it a little bit quickly for you. So I'll just click the column and press delete. Make that auto schedule again because it removed it. Okay, so all I did was I clicked the start column, right click, go down your menu, click on insert column. If you know the first letter of the name of the column, then you can utilize it. So that's what's important with this. This is how you can customize your screen, as I've talked about in an earlier tutorial. Slide down to duration. And now I have the duration column there. So you know what? This change took 16 days, but it's only impacting the project by 12 days. So part of that is that 4 days of this really had float. And part of that is where it overlapped, where you could see it overlapped on this part of the screen here, where it overlapped the taped drywall by 4 working days. So you can see that for a period of time, it had float before it actually impacted the project. And then it started to push out the other activities. So we could actually even count how this has pushed out. So you could see that here you've got 4 days, and then you got another 5 days, there's 9, there's 10, 11, 12 days, because the beginning of this was originally planned to be over here. So that's pushed out our schedule, the install T-bar ceiling, by 12 days. So now we know that this change is impacting our project by 12 days. And we could make educated decisions around that. We could tell the client that the projects, if they go ahead with this, it's going to delay the project by 12 days. We could price our change to look at, well, how can we shorten the schedule? Or is there a way of working weekends, overtime to shorten this in our planning process so that we actually don't delay the project by 12 days? And what are the extra costs involved in that process if we do enact that? Because one might be costing, let's say it's costing $3,000 extra, and the other might be costing $5,000 extra to try to still finish on time because of all the overtime. So these are very valid things to be thinking about. And as you can see, it really didn't take that much time. You have to remember, I'm sitting here explaining it to you. It would take me a lot less time if I just did it and looked at exactly what was going on. You can even use what we call the drawing tools. Like most programs in Microsoft, you can click on the Format tab, and you can even draw it out if you wanted to better display the impact that this is having. So you could have a line here, and you could draw another line, grabbing it on the drawing tools, draw a line here. I often like to do this with this. And you could draw a line across, almost like you're doing extension and dimension lines. Oops, I'll just, sometimes that gets a little bit carried away there. I'll just bring it back in here, go to my task, scroll to task, and get that other line in place. So I'm just going to go back to Format and bring that line in place. There. Then I put a text box. You can type in whatever you want. Bulkhead delays. Install T-bar by 12 days. I could maybe just move that up a little bit. There we go. And you can adjust it. Okay, so I've got that there, and what you can actually do is if you were working with a client on this and you wanted to explain it, you could just pull that up and you could go to the snipping tool, right? So you could click and you could go to the snipping tool, which all Microsoft programs, operating systems have, and you could just click New Snip. And then you could just take a screenshot that would encompass what you want to display there. Now you've got that close-up of your model, and you could copy it, and you could paste it into a Word file. And in the Word file, you could also have your costing. You could have pictures of the office that are showing the impact and explaining it. You have to remember, when you're using scheduling software, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So anytime that you can take something from Microsoft Project and integrate it with a picture and put it into a costing and that explains it, especially if you're going to say, well, this is why we have to work overtime, because if we don't, this is how it's going to impact the project. It helps to justify it. I've found in my experience that you have to really sell changes to clients because they have a certain expectation of what it's going to cost, and they fully don't understand all the impacts that it may have to the rest of your project. So this really helps as a tool, using scheduling software and integrating it with other tools such as photo images, costing tools, to help bring the whole thing together as a package. And so the client fully understands you're not trying to take advantage of them. You're really selling it in a positive and proactive way, so that as a contractor, you're not losing money on changes. And as a client, you have trust in your contractor and you believe they're doing the best they can given the circumstances. And then that's a win-win, because fully 80% of contractors' work is with repeat clients. So hopefully that's given you a good indication of how we can insert a change into a schedule and see the impact of it. The thing I didn't cover today, which I can cover in another tutorial, is this would have also, if it was a cost-loaded schedule and I had variable costs like management teams being there longer, site super PM, and it was down as a variable cost, when it would take 12 days longer, I would have been also able to go to the cost screen and seen the impact on the cost, because I would have had a baseline cost and it would have shown me the variance on the variable costs. And I could have added the extra cost that the bulkhead is costing itself to the various activities. So that's another advantage if you're using a cost-loaded schedule. In this instance, I wasn't doing it that way. I just wanted to show the impact of putting a change in the schedule and keeping it that way. The other one last final thing that you could do is, which I know a number of my contractors like to do, is they'll have a heading at the bottom of their screen, and they'll call it change orders, and they might just roll this up and click on it and slowly move it down below the change orders, and they will indent that below it, and then your change order is down below. And so if you had like 30 change orders, you could have them all listed and numbered: change order number 1, change order number 2, change order number 3. But they're still, if I open it up, they're still connected to the activities. I'll just get rid of this. They're still connected to the activities that are up above. So if I open that up, the connections, the linkages, everything stays the same. Some contractors like to do that. Others like to leave it where they inserted it into the schedule. Some contractors, it's just a matter of preference on that. The important thing in my mind is that you have all of the changes that are impacting your project inserted into the schedule, because often you may not even know that a change order is impacting it. Like this example that we just did, it was 16 days long, but it only impacted the schedule 12 days. Well, you might have looked at the change order if it was even more severe and said, oh, it's 12 days long or it's 16 days long, but it's in an area of float, it's not a problem. But meanwhile, eventually it is a problem because that becomes critical. So in this case, it had 4 days of float, and then it started pushing the project 4 days longer. So we have to know the impact, and sometimes at first glance it's not what it appears until we actually put it logically in the schedule and we analyze it. So I hope this has helped you out, and I wish you the best in your endeavors. I'm Tom Stephenson for Microsoft Project Tutorial 7, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube page, and that way you'll stay up to date with new videos on this topic. All the best and have a great day.